I have told this story before at dinners in clubs to men who asked how Edmund Vane, Duke of Orving, the most correctly managed man in England, came to marry a woman who had been washing pots in his own kitchen 3 months prior. I always begin the same way. It was his grandmother's doing, and she knew it, and she was insufferably pleased about it, and she deserved to be. My name is Crispin Hale. I am not a duke. I am a barrister, a moderate landowner in Hertfordshire, and the man who has been Edmund's closest friend since we were 8 years old, and he pushed me into the Orving fish pond for saying that his horse was not as fast as he claimed. We have been inseparable since, which tells you something about the nature of our friendship, which is built largely on my tolerating his arrogance and his tolerating my opinions about it. He is the best man I know. He was, for the first 34 years of his life, also the most comprehensively managed man I know, managed by rank, by expectation, by the particular weight of being the last Orving, the inheritor of a name that went back 300 years and was not permitted to end badly. Lady Orving, Edmund's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, a woman who had been navigating the politics of 5 London seasons before Edmund's father was born, had watched her grandson manage himself into near total isolation with the calm patience of a chess player who knows exactly when to move. She had offered opinions. He had thanked her. She had made introductions. He had been polite. She had produced, over the course of 7 years, a careful succession of young women who were suitable in every measurable dimension, and he had found reasons, none of them dishonest, to proceed no further with any of them. She had watched this with the expression she reserved for situations she was allowing to develop before intervening. In the autumn of his 34th year, she intervened. I was at Orving House when she told him. This is significant because Edmund had been somewhat careful in recent months about which conversations he had in my presence, having learned over 30 years that I had opinions and expressed them. I believe he forgot I was in the room. I was reading near the window, and Lady Orving had arrived without announcement, which she was entitled to do in her grandson's house, and did regularly. "I have hired a new kitchen maid," she said, without preface, which was her way. "Her name is Wren Colby. She comes from a family in Sevenoaks, tradesman's family, quite respectable, father a joiner of some reputation. She has been working in a house in Bloomsbury for the past 2 years and comes with a reference I checked personally." Edmund looked up from his desk. "I have a housekeeper," he said. "Yes, and she is perfectly adequate for managing what you currently have," Lady Orving said. "I felt the kitchen could use expansion. I have arranged it." "You have arranged it," Edmund said. He had the particular tone he used when his grandmother had done something he could not precisely object to, but was aware was not quite what it appeared. "In my house." "I have the right," she said, and she did, because Orving House was technically still hers until Edmund married, which was a legal arrangement she had quietly preserved for exactly this sort of purpose. "You will not notice her. She works in the kitchen." "I don't doubt it," Edmund said. "Good," she said, and left. He looked across the room at me. I had not moved, and I had no expression on my face, because I had been practicing no expression for 30 years. "You heard that," he said. "I'm afraid so," I said. "She is doing something," he said. "Undoubtedly," I said. "Would you like me to speculate on what?" He looked at me for a moment. "No," he said, and went back to his papers. He was wrong about not wanting to know, but he was not yet ready to know it, and Lady Orving had timed her move accordingly. I met Wren Colby 3 days later, before Edmund did. I had called at Orving House on a Tuesday morning and was waiting in the hall when I heard, from the direction of the back corridor, a crash of considerable enthusiasm followed by a voice saying, with great clarity and no particular distress, "That is going to be a problem." The housekeeper, Mrs. Petch, had gone upstairs, and I was closest to the corridor, and I went a look because I am constitutionally curious, and because the voice had been interesting. What I found was a young woman standing in the middle of a collision between a tray, a row of copper pots that had been hanging from a hook, and what had been a small but apparently fragile shelf bracket, all now on the floor in various stages of consequence. She was looking at the arrangement with the expression of someone running a rapid calculation. She was perhaps 3 and 20, slight but not frail, with dark hair pinned back in the practical way of someone who works with their hands, and a face that was not, by the conventional standards of the drawing room, remarkable, but which had the quality of being entirely present, if that makes sense, which I think it does. She looked as though she was paying attention to things. She looked up at me. She did not appear startled by my presence. "Are you the footman?" she said. "I'm afraid not," I said. "I'm a guest, Crispin Hale." "The Duke's friend," she said. "Mrs. Petch mentioned you. I'm Wren Colby, the new kitchen maid." She looked at the floor. "The bracket was loose when I arrived. I reported it. I thought it had been attended to." "Clearly not," I said. "Clearly not," she agreed. "I'm going to need help moving the pots back." She paused. "Not you, obviously. You're a guest." "I don't mind," I said. "Your coat," she said, looking at my coat. I looked at my coat. It was a good coat. "You're probably right," I said. "I usually am," she said, without any particular swagger, again accuracy. She looked up at the wall where the bracket had been. "The hook itself is fine. I'll need a new bracket and someone to fix it before Mrs. Petch sees, or she'll have it reported as my fault, and I'll be paying for the shelf out of a fortnight's wages." "I can speak to Mrs. Petch," I said. She looked at me. "Why would you?" "Because the bracket was loose before you arrived," I said, "and it seems unjust." She studied me for a moment with the particular directness of someone deciding whether a person is worth trusting. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." I spoke to Mrs. Petch. The bracket was replaced. Wren Colby did not pay for the shelf. Walking home that afternoon, I thought about a young woman who had said, "I usually am," without performance, and had accepted help without either false modesty or excessive gratitude. And I thought about Lady Orving, and I began to understand what she was doing. I had known Edmund Vane for 26 years. I had watched a parade of suitable women pass through his drawing room, and I had watched him be perfectly courteous and entirely absent in each of those conversations. And I had begun to think, privately, that what Edmund needed was someone who had not arranged herself to be found acceptable. Someone who was simply what she was, and expected everyone else to manage accordingly. I said nothing to Edmund. This was partly because I had promised Lady Orving nothing and thus was under no obligation, and partly because I was, I confess, interested to see what happened. Edmund encountered Wren Colby for the first time on a Thursday, which I know because he told me about it on Friday, in the slightly over-careful way he had of mentioning things he was not quite sure how to classify. "I went to the kitchen," he said, which was already unusual. Edmund did not, as a rule, go to the kitchen. He spoke to Mrs. Petch, who spoke to the cook, who managed the kitchen. This was the established order. "Did you?" I said. "I went to find the cook," he said. "There was a question about the dinner arrangements for Thursday next. Lord Alving is coming, and he has a condition about fish. I wanted to ensure it was properly communicated." "Of course," I said. "The cook was not there," he said. "There was a young woman, the new kitchen maid, apparently. She was doing something complicated with a great deal of copper and didn't look up when I came in. I waited. I told her I needed to speak with the cook," Edmund said. "And," I said. "She said the cook had gone to the market and would be back within the hour, and that if I had a message she could pass it on when he returned. And she still didn't look up." "Efficient," I said. "I gave her the message," he said, "about Lord Alving and the fish. And she received it. She said," he paused. He had the expression of a man examining something he had not expected to find interesting. "She said sole, mackerel, or salmon. She was clarifying the condition, I said. She was asking me to be specific, he said, because a condition about fish is not apparently adequate information for a kitchen. She had a point. I didn't know the answer. So what happened? I said I would find out, he said, and I left, and she still didn't look up. There was a pause. She seems very focused on her work, I said, in a neutral tone. She does, Edmund said. He looked at me. My grandmother hired her. I'm aware, I said. My grandmother is doing something, he said. You said that before, I said. You declined to speculate at the time. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who suspects he is being managed and cannot prove it. Then he picked up his correspondence and said nothing more about it, but he had gone to the kitchen. I noted this. Lady Orvin made her second move 8 days later. She arrived at Orvin House for what she called a small dinner, herself, Edmund, myself, and a Lady Croft who was a connection of hers from Bath. The timing of Lady Croft's presence, I later understood, was deliberate in a way that had nothing to do with Lady Croft, who was pleasant and 64 and entirely not a matrimonial candidate. She was there because she was a known quantity, which meant Edmund would be relaxed and not managing himself. The kitchen was, it turned out, short-handed that evening. The cook was managing, but only barely, and Lady Orvin, who had arranged this with Mrs. Petch in advance, I later learned, though I did not know it then, had specifically instructed that the dinner be a formal one, which meant additional courses and a greater demand on the kitchen than was usual for 4 people. Halfway through the second remove, the timing went wrong, and someone needed to carry the extra bread from the kitchen to the dining room without making it a production. Wren brought the bread. She came in with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew the task and had no performance to give around it. She set the bread on the sideboard, adjusted it slightly. The basket had been placed slightly off-center and turned to go. Lady Orvin said, "Miss Colby." Wren stopped and turned. "You know where the extra candles are kept?" Mrs. Petch mentioned the dining room candelabra was dripping. "Yes, my lady," Wren said. She looked at the candelabra in question, assessed it in 2 seconds, went to the sideboard cupboard, found the replacement candles, which were there because she had put them there 2 days ago when she noticed the candelabra was running low, which was how she worked, replaced the candle efficiently, and left. The room was quiet for a moment. Lady Croft said, "What a capable young woman." Edmund said nothing, but I watched him watch the door after she had gone, and I filed it away. The third encounter was not Lady Orvin's arrangement. It was rain. It rained in London for 4 days consecutively in October, the particular kind of gray, unremitting London rain that makes everything indoors feel close and everything outdoors feel impossible. Edmund, who had planned to ride in the park and then go to his club, found himself at Orvin House with nothing useful to do and went, on some impulse he did not examine, to the kitchen garden. Wren was there. She was the only person in the kitchen garden in October rain, because she had a purpose in being there. She was cutting the last of the herbs before the frost could take them, moving through the beds with the unhurried focus she brought to everything, a large basket over her arm and her hair doing what hair does in rain regardless of pinning. Edmund told me this part himself, later, in the way he told me things when he had decided they were worth saying. "I asked her what she was doing," he said, "in the rain." "And she told you," I said. "She said, saving the rosemary and the thyme, if I leave them another day they'll be worthless." And she kept cutting. "She didn't stop working," I said. "She didn't stop working," he said. "I asked if I could help." This stopped me. Edmund Vane did not, as a rule, offer to cut herbs in the rain. "What did she say?" I asked. "She handed me the basket," he said, "just like that, without ceremony, and she said, 'Hold it level, please, or the stems will bruise.'" I looked at him. "I held it level," he said. "For how long?" I said. "Until the rosemary was done," he said. About 20 minutes. It was raining quite hard. You stood in the kitchen garden in the rain, holding a basket of herbs, I said, for 20 minutes. The rosemary was very good, he said, which was not exactly an answer. I said nothing. He looked at me. She talked while she worked, he said, not to fill the silence, because she had things to say. She told me about the rosemary, how the late-cutting variety has a different oil content than the early, and why it matters for meat. She asked me what Lord Alvin's fish condition turned out to be. I told her it was salmon. He had a bad experience with mackerel in 1809. She said that was a very specific memory for a fish. I said he was a very specific man. She said that was often the way with men of rank, in her experience. He said this last sentence in a particular tone, which told me he had turned it over several times since she said it. Was she being impertinent? I asked. No, he said after a moment. She was being accurate, and she said it without, he stopped, without performing it. There was no curtsy and a sideways look. She was just saying what she thought. She does that, I said. He looked at me. You've spoken with her. The bracket incident, I said, on the first Tuesday. He absorbed this. What did you think of her? I thought she was the most straightforwardly honest person I had met in some time, I said, and I thought she was interesting. He looked at his desk for a moment. Yes, he said. She is. This was, in 26 years of friendship, the most revealing thing Edmund Vane had said to me about a woman. I went home and wrote Lady Orvin a brief note that said, simply, the kitchen garden, 20 minutes in the rain. She replied the next morning with a single line. I knew it on the first Tuesday. Lady Orvin made her third move in November. She arranged, and this was a slightly more complicated arrangement, requiring the cooperation of Mrs. Petch and the temporary indisposition of 2 other staff members on the same afternoon, for Wren to be sent to the estate library with a task. The task was legitimate. Several books from the kitchen records going back to the previous decade needed to be cross-referenced against the household accounts, and the household accounts were in the library, and Wren was the person in the kitchen with the neatest hand and the most organized mind. Mrs. Petch sent her with the books and a list. Edmund was in the library. This was not arranged. He was simply there, as he often was in the afternoons. When Wren arrived and found him, she stopped in the doorway. I beg your pardon, Your Grace, she said. Mrs. Petch sent me to cross-reference the kitchen records. I can come back. There's room enough, he said. He had been reading. He looked at the books she was carrying. What are you cross-referencing? She told him the discrepancy she had found between the spice deliveries in the ledger and the actual inventory in the kitchen, which suggested either a recording error or a supply shortfall over the past 3 years that had been quietly absorbed into the household accounts without anyone noticing. Edmund put down his book. Show me, he said. She showed him. They spent the better part of 2 hours at the library table, going through the kitchen records and the household accounts together, and they found the discrepancy. A series of recording errors made by a previous understeward who had been let go for unrelated reasons and whose records no one had closely checked afterward. It was, in practical terms, not a crisis. The shortfall was small and had been covered, but it was a real accounting gap, and Wren had found it in her first month because she kept her own inventory and trusted numbers over assumptions. Edmund, who was meticulous about his estate accounts, was not pleased about the gap, but he was, I later learned, considerably more interested in the fact that she had found it. She went through 3 years of household accounts with me, he told me afterward. She knows how to read a ledger. She has an orderly mind, I said. She has more than that, he said. She told me, while we were going through the accounts, that her father kept his joinery business accounts the same way, and that she had helped him with them from the time she was 12. She said a number is only useful if it is accurate, and that an inaccurate number is worse than no number at all because it gives you false certainty. That is a very sensible position, I said. It is, he said. It is also the position I have held about estate management for 11 years, and have never heard stated that plainly by anyone who was not an accountant I was paying. He was quiet for a moment. She asked me, he said, at the end when the records were sorted and she was stacking the books to take back, she asked if I had a system for the household accounts, or if the previous system had simply accumulated. What did you say? I said it had largely accumulated, he said. She said that's usually how these things happen, and she left. He looked at me in the way he looked at me when he was not ready to say the thing that was actually on his mind. She is not like anyone I have had a conversation with, he said, in this house or elsewhere. No, I said, she isn't. My grandmother arranged this, he said. It was not quite a question. Possibly, I said. She is a kitchen maid, Crispin, he said. It came out differently than I expected, not dismissively, but with a kind of bewildered weight to it, as if he were stating an obstacle he was not certain he believed in. She is, I said. She is also the woman who found a 3-year accounting gap in her first month, because she keeps her own inventory and trusts numbers over assumptions. He looked at me. You're not going to pretend to be neutral about this, he said. I'm not going to pretend about anything, I said. I've known you for 26 years, Edmund. I know what your face looks like when you've met someone who is genuinely interesting to you. I haven't seen it very often. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she cannot be. The question of what she can or cannot be, I said, is exactly the question your grandmother is asking you to examine. He did not respond to this. He picked up his correspondence. But he did not read it, and after some time he set it down again and looked at the window, and I could see him thinking. December came, and with it the London season in its winter form, with a round of balls, dinners, assemblies and visits that the county gentry conducted with the discipline of an occupying army. Edmund was expected at most of them, and he went, because this was part of the management of his life, and because he had always gone, and because not going required explanations he preferred not to give. Lady Orvin went with him. This was not unusual. She was a regular fixture of the season, and her presence at any gathering was considered an endorsement. But she had, in this particular December, a quality of attention about her that I recognized. She was watching something. I was also watching something. I watched Edmund at 3 balls and 2 dinners, and I watched him do the thing he had always done, be precisely, correctly present, say the right things to the right people, dance with the appropriate partners, make no mistake and feel nothing. He was, by every external measure, the Duke of Orvin in full and graceful function. He was also, I had come to understand, a man running on discipline and nothing else, and it was beginning to show, not to anyone who did not know him, but to me, and I was fairly certain to Lady Orvin. Wren, meanwhile, was still in the kitchen. She had, in the 2 months since the library afternoon, expanded what I privately thought of as her territory, not by rank or assignment, but by sheer competence and the natural gravity of a person who does things well. She had reorganized the kitchen stores, with Mrs. Petch's reluctant blessing, once she saw the result, established a system for the weekly market orders that reduced waste, and started teaching one of the younger kitchen girls to read well enough to manage the simple supply records. This last she did without fanfare, in the gaps between other work, because the girl had asked, and it seemed like a useful thing. I knew about most of this because I visited Orvin House frequently, and because Wren had, somewhere in the 2nd month, accepted me as a regular presence without quite classifying me as a friend, which I thought was accurate. We talked when we crossed paths. She had opinions about things, food, management, the organization of information, occasionally literature, because she read when she could borrow something worth reading, and she expressed them without the social calculation that governed most conversations I had. It was, I found, rather refreshing. Edmund, I believe, thought about her most days. He did not say so. But there was a quality of restraint in him that was different from his usual managed composure, something that had a specific direction to it, which I thought I recognized. Lady Orville arranged the ball in the second week of December. It was at Harrington House, a large London house lent to her for the occasion by a friend, and it was the kind of event that was called a winter assembly, but was in practice a gathering of everyone in Edmund's social world, all of the people who mattered and a few who mattered adjacently. I had been invited, as always. The guest list was approximately 200 people. It was, by any measure, the sort of event at which dukes were seen and at which things were settled. Lady Orville sent a note to Mrs. Petch 3 days before the ball. I saw a copy of it afterward in Lady Orville's own hand. It said, "Wren Colby is to assist with the food service at the Harrington House Assembly on Friday. She should be dressed appropriately, not as kitchen staff but as a serving assistant, which is a different thing. See to it. She is not to be told why, only that her help is needed." Mrs. Petch, who was loyal to Lady Orville in ways that ran deeper than her official employment, saw to it. I did not know this until I arrived at the ball on Friday evening and saw Wren on the far side of the room. She was not in kitchen clothes. She was in the dress that Mrs. Petch had provided, plain, dark, better quality than her usual work clothes, appropriate to the role of a senior serving assistant, and her hair was done in the way of someone who had received assistance from a maid, and was wearing it as a fact rather than an ornament. She carried herself the same way she always did, entirely present, entirely herself. In a room full of silk and diamonds and the deliberate display of rank, she looked like a woman who had nothing to prove, which was its own kind of statement. Edmund saw her before I did. I know this because I was watching him when the moment happened, and I saw his gaze go to the far side of the room and then hold, the way it holds when it has found something it was not looking for. He did not move immediately. He was in conversation with Lord Farrington, who was saying something about grain prices, and he finished that conversation before he moved. Edmund Vane has never been rude to Lord Farrington in his life, and was not going to start, but there was a quality of waiting in him that was visible to me even at that distance. Lady Orville appeared at my elbow. "She's here," she said. "I can see that," I said. "He's seen her," she said. "I can see that as well," I said. She looked at me. "You've known something for some time," she said. "I could tell from your note." "The kitchen garden," I said. 20 minutes in the rain holding an herb basket." "Oh, it was earlier than that for me," she said. I knew when she reorganized my spice cabinet without being asked and then told me matter-of-factly that the previous arrangement was causing waste. She was right, and she knew she was right, and she told me without apology and without flattery. She paused. Edmund has spent 34 years surrounded by flattery. He does not know what to do with its absence. "He is learning," I said. "He is," she said, "with some assistance." Lord Farrington had released Edmund. He crossed the room. Not all the way, not yet. He stopped a circumspect distance from where Wren was standing near the service table, which gave him an excuse to be nearby, and he said something to her. I could not hear it from where I stood. I watched her face. She looked at him, the direct attention, and she said something back. He said something. She looked briefly amused. He said something else. Lady Orville made a satisfied sound. "What's happening?" I asked. "He's making conversation with a woman he's interested in," she said. "Something he has not done sincerely in 7 years. It's rather wonderful to watch." I watched. Across the ballroom, 200 people did the work of the London season, the introductions, the dancing, the careful measurement of alliances. And in the far corner, a duke and a kitchen maid were apparently talking about something that was making her look thoughtful and him look more alive than I had seen him in years. "She's going to know," I said. "When she finds out it was arranged, she won't like it." "No," Lady Orville said, "she won't." That concerns you, I said. Not particularly, she said. She is a woman who respects honesty. The arrangement is not dishonest. I hired her because she was capable and because I thought they might suit. Both things are true. The question of whether she was also installed with an ulterior motive is a question Edmund can answer for her when the time comes. She paused. If he is honest, she will forgive it. If he is not, she will not, and she will be right. Across the room, the thing that I had been watching build for 2 months began its final movement. What Edmund told me later about that conversation. He had gone to her on the excuse of the service table, which was thin, and he knew it. She had looked at him when he arrived with the expression of a woman who was aware that a duke did not typically stop at the service table unless he had a reason, and who was not going to pretend otherwise. He had asked her how she was finding the ball. She had said she was finding it efficient. The guests were well managed. The flow of the room was good. The food was arriving on a sensible rotation. He had said he meant how was she finding it personally, not professionally. She had said that was a different question, and that personally she found it rather strange. She had been to very few events of this kind, and the quantity of silk in one room was striking. He had laughed. She had looked at him when he laughed, with the attention she always had, as though she were deciding what a laugh meant. You laughed, I said when he told me this. At something real, he said. Not because it was appropriate to laugh, because it was genuinely funny. She said it without irony, and it was funnier for that. He was quiet. She asked me, he said. Toward the end, she said, Your Grace, why is your grandmother watching this conversation from across the room with the expression of a woman who has won something? I stopped. I looked, he said. My grandmother was, in fact, watching from across the room with exactly that expression. What did you say? I asked. I said because she probably has, he said. And Wren, I said. He was quiet for a moment. She looked at me, and she said, she hired me, didn't she, not just for the kitchen. And you said, I asked. I said I believed so, yes, he said. I said I had suspected it for some time. She was angry, I asked. She was exact, he said. She looked at the room. She said, I see. And then she said, I don't particularly like being arranged, Your Grace, even for good reasons. And she said it very quietly, without drama, in the way she says things when she means them entirely. What did you do? I asked. I said, he said, and then he stopped, and he looked at the window, and I waited. I said that I was sorry for it, that the arrangement was my grandmother's doing and not mine, and that whatever she had intended, I had not followed it in any direction it did not lead me honestly. I said that the kitchen garden was real, and the library was real, and this conversation was real, and that if she chose to be angry about the arrangement, that was entirely fair, and I would not pretend she didn't have cause. I looked at him. Edmund Vane had just told a woman the complete truth without managing it first. This was, in 34 years, without precedent. What did she say? I asked. She said, he told me, that's a very honest answer. And I said, and she said she needed to return to the service table, he said, and she went back to the service table. I looked at him. I danced 3 dances with other people, he said, and thought about nothing else. And then, I said, and then I went back, he said, to the service table, and I said, Miss Colby, I would like to ask you something, and I'd like you to tell me what you actually think, not what seems correct to say. What did you ask her? I said. I asked her, he said, whether she thought people could be suited to each other across an arrangement they didn't choose, whether the fact of being placed did not necessarily diminish what was real. That is a rather philosophical question for a winter ball, I said. She thought so too, he said. She said, that depends on whether what is real is in fact real, or whether you only think it is because the arrangement suggested it was. And then she said, I don't know the answer to that yet, but I know that you held a herb basket in the rain for 20 minutes without complaining, and that is not nothing. I sat very still. She remembered the herb basket, I said. She remembered the herb basket, he said. Edmund, I said. I know, he said. What did you do? I said. I asked her, he said, if I might call on her, not through my grandmother, as myself, with the understanding that the arrangement was exposed and she knew it, and that whatever happened next would be entirely her choice. He looked at me. In 34 years, I had not seen his face look quite like that, stripped of the management, the rank, the controlled precision that he wore like a second coat. He looked like a man who had put something down and was surprised to find his hands empty. She said yes, I said. She said, he told me, that she would think about it, and that she would tell me on Monday. And it is, I said. Saturday, he said. He waited until Monday. I know this because I sat with him for part of Sunday, and he was the worst company he had been in 34 years, which is to say he was entirely alive and entirely unable to manage it. On Monday, Ren Colby told him yes. There is a version of what happened next that I could tell quickly. They called on each other. The county noticed. Lady Orvin watched from a comfortable distance with the expression of a woman who has won at chess. And Edmund asked Wren to marry him in February in the kitchen garden at Orvin House, standing in the same bed where the rosemary grew, which he had maintained carefully all winter in the way of a man preserving something that mattered to him. She said yes, after a silence of approximately 30 seconds, that I am told was the longest 30 seconds of his life. The county had opinions. The county always has opinions. Edmund managed them in a particular way, which was to not manage them at all. He simply told the truth when asked. She was a woman of exceptional capacity, entirely honest, and the person he wanted, and the world was welcome to form its view. Lady Orvin received several letters from friends expressing various degrees of concern, and replied to each with the phrase, "I know exactly what I did," which closed the matter with most of them and left the rest without any useful avenue of complaint. Wren's father, the joiner from Sevenoaks, a man named Thomas Colby, a quiet person with the same direct eyes as his daughter and the calloused hands of someone who had worked all his life, came to Orvin House in March. Edmund met with him alone. I do not know everything that was said. I know that they talked for 2 hours and that afterward Edmund told me Thomas Colby had said, "My daughter is not an arrangement, Your Grace. She is herself." And that Edmund had said, "I know that better than anyone." Thomas Colby gave his blessing. It was not, by Edmund's account, effusive. It was the blessing of a man who has considered carefully and decided that the person his daughter has chosen is in fact worthy of her, which was a more useful kind. They were married in April. The church was in London, a quiet church, not the great cathedral that the county might have expected, and the wedding was not small, because a Duke of Orvin cannot have a small wedding without it being discussed for a decade, but it was, within its necessary scale, honest. Wren wore her hair the way she always wore it, arranged with a few strands loose at her temple, and she did not wear diamonds, which she was entitled to and declined, because she preferred not to, and Edmund had long since understood that she was going to make her own decisions about what she wore and where she stood and what she said, and that this was the thing he valued most. Lady Orvin was in the front pew. She wore the expression I had described in my note, the expression of a woman who has won something, and she wore it for the entire ceremony without apology because she had won, and she knew it, and she felt the apology would be unnecessary. At the wedding breakfast she said to me, "I knew it on the first Tuesday." "You've said that," I said. "It bears repeating," she said. "No one believed me when I said she would be right for him. They all said the gap was too great." "And you said," I said. "I said the gap was irrelevant," she said. "The question was never whether she was the right rank. The question was whether she was the right person. She is. I knew it in 30 seconds." "Because she reorganized your spice cabinet," I said. "Because she told me why it needed reorganizing," she said. without apology and without flattery. She was right about the spices, and she knew she was right, and she said so plainly. She looked across the room to where Edmund and Wren were standing, receiving their guests with the slightly dazed efficiency of two people doing a large social task in a state of considerable personal happiness. "He has never had that," she said. "He has had deference and flattery and careful management. He has never had someone who simply told him the truth." "She told him the truth about the herb basket," I said. "She said it was not nothing," Lady Orville said. "She was right about that too. I told you at the beginning that I have told this story before at dinners in clubs to men who want to know how it happened. They usually want the scheme. They find Lady Orville's arrangement satisfying in the way that a clever plot satisfies, and they focus on the mechanics, the kitchen, the bracket, the library, the ball, the exposure. They like the idea of a formidable old woman moving her pieces on the board. But the scheme, I have come to understand, was not the thing. The scheme was only the occasion. Lady Orville created the proximity. She could not create what happened in it. What happened in it was this. A man who had been managing himself at a careful, correct distance from everything real found, in a kitchen and a kitchen garden and a library and a rainy afternoon, a person who did not perform, who said, "I usually am," without swagger, who told him a number was only useful if it was accurate, who noticed his grandmother watching from across a ballroom and named it directly, who said she would think about it and thought about it and then said yes. He had never met anyone like that. She had never, I suspect, met anyone who was willing to hold a basket in the rain for 20 minutes simply because she asked. They were, as Lady Orville had known from the first Tuesday, exactly right for each other, and the only question had been whether Edmund was going to manage himself out of it before he managed himself into it. He didn't, and I was there for all of it, which I count among the privileges of my life. I saw them last month at Orville House, the country house this time, not the London one in the late summer when the kitchen garden is at its fullest. Wren was in the garden. She was showing Edmund something about the rosemary, whether the late-cutting variety was coming in properly, I believe, or something of that kind. He was listening with the complete attention he gives things that matter to him, which is the same attention he gives estate accounts and decisions of consequence, and since April, anything she says to him. I watched them from the terrace for a while. He was not performing being a duke, and she was not performing being a duchess, which she is now and which sits on her with the slightly surprised practicality of someone who has been given a new tool and is already working out how to use it properly. Lady Orville was on the terrace beside me. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "She told me last week that the kitchen at the country house has been organized wrong for 40 years, and she intends to address it." "What did you say?" I said. "I said she was probably right," Lady Orville said. "She usually is." She looked at her grandson and her granddaughter-in-law in the kitchen garden in the late summer light, and I looked with her, and we said nothing else for a while, because nothing else was needed.